Hello, students. Good evening. I hope you all are fine. Today, I am going to discuss chief characteristics of Victorian age. So, introduction. The Victorian, from the coronation of Queen Victoria in 1837 until her death in 1901, was an era of numerous disturbing social developments. So it was the time when from it's a very long time actually, from 1837 to 1901, and that was a very long time until Queen Victoria's death. This is, and then there are lot of social upheaval were there. So the literature of Victorian age entered a new period after the Romantic Revival. So that Romantic Revival came before Victorian age, where author wanted to write by their own natural instinct, right? That time was known as Romantic Revival, because romantic author used to write by their like natural feelings, and also that was again revived before Victorian age. So the literature of this age was preceded by Romanticism and was followed by modernism or realism. So that is very important thing, that what the literature of this age, means Victorian age, was preceded by the Romanticism and was followed by modernism or realism, right? That is real modernism or realism. They wanted to write what is real, right? So that they have come from Romanticism, and then uh, they follow, and then modernism or realism was followed, and in between, so we can say that Romanticism, then Victorian age, and then modernism. This way, Victorian era was between Romanticism and modernism. Anyway, during this period, the writers were forced to write on the living issues of the society. This is very important point, that they were forced to write on the living like issues, prevailing issues of the society, right? Okay, in this way the literature of this era was directed to issues such as growth of English democracy, the education of the masses, the progress of industrial enterprise, and the rise of materialistic philosophy. Very important, right? What that's a The rise of materialistic philosophy, because people were very much materialistic, and problem of newly industrialized workers. That's a very important point, where they were compelled to write. However, during this period, there was a lot of radical social changes. That's a very important element of Victorian era, that there are lot of radical social changes were there. Many poets of this period did not like the romanticized version of the society, right? So this is the introduction of the Victorian age or Victorian era. Now, characteristics. During this period, there was a progress in the field of science and arts, again important, because this was the progress in the field of science and arts, right? But this age was equally marked by social unrest. Though on one hand they were progressing, and scientific invention and arts development of arts was there, but at the same time it was the time of social unrest. There were some moments like Oxford moment, right? And Raphaelite school of poetry, right? So pre-Raphaelite school of poetry and Oxford movement, right? So which were a reason of social unrest in this age. So social unrest was the one of the causes, and this age was also an age of truth and morality of truth, right? So this is the age of truth and morality of truth. Because of spreading of knowledge, people of this age become knowledgeable, and it was the time to stop the war. Very important, time to stop the war by the help of knowledge. We should, what's the use of knowledge, wisdom, that war should be stopped. So let's have a book on that's the important characteristics. Okay, now industrial revolution. So first element, industrial revolution. The Victorian age is the era of political peace and prosperity in England. As a result, it brought the industrial progress. The industrial revolution gave the birth of industrial economy in England, right? So Indian revolution came, and then it gave birth to industrial economy in England, and many factories and mills were established across the country. And industrial revolution also brought the social disorder. However, number of manufacturing companies were being established, but at the same time, industrial revolution brought social disorder also, and economical sorrow in society. So that was the matter of worried. As a result, two classes came into existence. On two classes, one is that's a industrial revolution, second one is that's a social disorder. Because people who were getting like earning money, so that society was divided into like poor class, middle class, higher class, something like this. As a result, the two classes came into existence. On the one side, there was a rich class of mill owner and capitalist, while on the other side there was a poor class of the laborers and factory workers, right? And that's why Gorky has written, and then many authors have written. And then because there's a class disorder and Pride and Prejudice, such kind of novel where we see that's a class social disorder, right? As a result, that's a wave of social unrest blew over the England. The influences of the social unrest found their expression in the works of writers like Matthew Arnold and Charles Dickens. That's a important. These are the famous authors of Victorian age. Now, Victorian realism. This is Victorian. That's a industrial revolution. Now Victorian realism. The literature of Victorian age is the literature of realism rather than romance. So that's an important point again. That's a this is a literature of realism rather than romance. In the Victorian literature, one can experience the feeling of a return from solitude to society. That's a in Victorian literature, one can experience the feeling of a return from solitude to society. Very important, right? From nature to industry, from nature to industry, from concepts to issues, and from spiritualism to pragmatism, practical life, from optimism to agnosticism, right? Agnosticism, doubtful whether God exists or not, that is agnosticism. From lyricism to criticism, right? And then from organicism to compromise, right? During this time, literature became an instrument of social reform, because at that time literature was the only means of, it's a big means of communication. Okay, the Victorian literature was marked with focused propagandist propagandistic and didactic aims, right? Important thing, it was marked with focused propagandistic and didactic, means industrial or means educated aims, right? That was there. Now The uniqueness of individuality. The writers of this age were gifted with strikingly originality in outlook, style, method, character, and viewpoint. What they are saying, that the uniqueness of individuality. Writers of this age were gifted with striking originality in outlook, style, method, character, and viewpoint. The uniqueness of individuality was typical characteristic of this era. That's a uniqueness of individuality, right? That was there. uh, Uniqueness of individuality, right? And then Charles Dickens, very famous author, is one of the most original writers and novelists in the world. The works of Bronte sisters are characterized by their lonely part of their work. In the work of Lord Macaulay, we find the energy and venture of Victorian self-made man, right? That's this Victorians, because industrialization, so people were getting an opportunity, and that's why they were self-made. And then William Thackeray loved to follow a haphazard path in the conduct of his stories. So this is something we have discussed about the uniqueness of individuality. Now the age of prose and novels, so that's I told you in the beginning also, that's the 18th century, and this was 19th century. So 18, that's a same century, na, 1837 to 1901. So that's the age of prose and novel. So during Victorian age, among all literary forms, novel were looking like a brightest star in the sky of England. And in this age, we had greatest novelists like Charles Dickens, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, uh, Annie Bronte. These were all Bronte sisters actually, and George Eliot, Thomas Hardy, William Thackeray, and George Borrow. Right? In this age, some of the famous novels of Charles Dickens that demands our attention, which are Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations. Very famous novels of Victorian era. That's a Oliver Twist, Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectation. Right? Okay. Now, deep moral note. Literature of this age was marked by a deep moral note. The prose and poetry of this era was motivated by a definite moral note. Tennyson, Browning, Ruskin, Bond, right, were interested in spreading their message and moral philosophy to their countrymen. They were teachers of England and wanted to uplift and instruct their fellow men. The psychological studies of George Eliot brought out the underlying truth of human life. That's a very important, because Tennyson especially, who argued that everything cannot be seen in the lens of science. He said that we have religion is something, and there is something which is above of all, and we cannot challenge to almighty or something supreme power. And then here T.S. Eliot was the famous, very world famous author, and his famous works are, number of works are famous. But then Wasteland is barren land, and very new and typical type of poetry, in which it's a very very beautiful poetry, in which he talks to he tries to understand, make us understand the human life. So that is something deep moral note, that barren land or wasteland, an unproductive land, we can say that. And that's a land is earth. So here T.S. Eliot has talked about social levels, and that's a superficial nature, and then hollowness, something this, and then other authors also. Now next element is that scientific spirit. The literature of this age was significantly modified by the concept of science. Under the spirit of science, Victorian society lived their life. Scientific research also raised some doubtful tendency. It could be observed in the words of this age. The questioning spirit in Arthur Hugh Cuff, the pessimism of uh, James Thomson, and melancholy of Matthew Arnold is the result of it, as well as poetry of Tennyson was very much influenced by advancement of science. In memoriam, yes, in memoriam also the undertones of scientific research could be heard. The social problems of the earlier Victorian writers like Charlotte Bronte, Dickens, and Kingsley were connected with the advancement of points in biology, psychology, and pathology. See what happened. That's all these authors have written about scientific research were there. But then again, ultimately, from this message, we can conclude that the authors were trying to make readers understand that we cannot find out each and every reason, and then the science is also always in progress, so that science is not final. So what we understand, that's a very few little knowledge, but then there is something about that, and that's why they were in favor of spiritual ideas and all. This is the important part of scientific spirit, right? In this age, romantic elements were vanished, and the writers of the age presented the harsh reality of society and human life in their work. It it was an age of harsh realism rather than fictions, stories of fantasy. Novels were very famous literary form in this age. What very important point is that in this age romantic elements were vanished. That's a no romanticism and something. What we have to talk, that's a reality. Nowadays you can see that number of movies based on reality or based on real, like Padmavati, like Arakshan, like something Kashmir Files and all. So similarly, same you can imagine for romantic love triangle or love story or something. This is similarly in this era, all these ideas are vanished. People want to see the reality on the screen, silver screen. So similarly here, that ideas elements were vanished, and the writers of the age presented the harsh reality of society. Similarly, now movies are based on harsh reality of the society and human life in their work, and it was an age of harsh realism rather than fiction stories. I gave you example love stories and love triangle. Novels were very famous literary form in this age, actually, because novels were was invented in 18th century, so that was the very famous form in literature. Now, writers of Victorian age, you can remember novelists, essayists, poets, right? So major novelists of Victorian age, and then Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens was very famous from that time, right? So that's Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Thomas Hardy, Charlotte Bronte, and William Thackeray, and Elizabeth Gaskell. And essayist genres, Matthew Arnold, very famous essayist, and then Thomas Macaulay, Thomas Carlyle, and John Henry Newman. Poets are Alfred Tennyson is very famous poet, and then Robert Browning, Rossetti, very famous poet, and then William Morris and Edward Fitzgerald. Right? So these are the author. Now, uh, here he is talking about Charles Dickens. He was the most famous Victorian novelist. His novels were very popular then and continue to be so even today. His novels were focused on the hardships faced by middle class and other social issues. His writing style was florid, poetic, and it had powerful comic touch, right? And he is well known for his novel Oliver Twist, in which he portrayed the harsh reality of workhouse in the Victorian era, as well as the victimization of women characters in the Victorian age. His other major works are Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Barnaby Rouge, A Tale of the Rights of 80. His work was liked and admired by eminent writers like George Gissing and G.K. Chesterton. Right? What what is famous for Charles Dickens? He was the Victorian novelist, right? Important, please remember, very important. And his novels were very popular then and continue to even today. Then his style was florid, poetic, and then it has had powerful comic touch. That is, comic touch was there, and then he is well known for his novel Oliver Twist. So please remember this work, in which he portrayed the harsh reality of workhouse in the Victorian era, as well as victimization of women character. Right, important. And then his major works are, these are the major works, right? Please take care. Now next, George Eliot. George Eliot, Mary. George Eliot is Mary and Evan, who used to wrote under the pen name George Eliot, was a master of novel. In second half of 19th century, George Eliot was a master of writing portraits, English rural societies, right? So she had mastery on portraying English rural societies, and this was what her novels were known for during his Victorian era. Eliot believed that there was something magical about her life. Mm, Her affection about this can be seen in Middlemarch, famous work of uh, George Eliot. The Mill on the Floss, another work which is also famous, and many more. Some of her books also had political undertones as well. She wrote about characters who were social outsiders, and also showcased the persecution of small towns in her works, right? The event in Middlemarch center on the beginning of the Reform Bill of 1832, which pulls different characters in opposite direction. Her some other well-known works are Romola, Silas Marner. These are the words, right? The Mill on the Floss. Eliot is not George Eliot is not just one of the most important female authors of all time, but also one of the uh, most important authors all time. And then her novels, one of the Eliot, and then wait a minute. Her novels are just as good in style, substance, and staying power as her male Victorian counterparts like Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, Vicky Collins, and more. Her novels showcase the best and worst part of humanity, right? Important. Her novels showcase the best and worst part of humanity, right? And they will be lauded as long as the Western canon continues to read. So, what is special for T.S. Eliot? She was compelled to write in the pen name because people at that time society, and then people not used to take seriously female authors, and that's why she had to struggle. However, she was equally good like Charles Dickens and other authors, and that's why she had produced very famous work. Right now, come to the poets. So major poets of the Victorian era, that's Alfred Lord Tennyson, one of the most important English poets of English Victorian age was Alfred Lord Tennyson. The works of Alfred Lord Tennyson are best known for their close affinity with the English mythology and English history. Tennyson's poetry is historically interesting on the social and political side. Tennyson presented all the essential features of Victorian life, the ideas and tastes in his poetry, and for this reason, we can rightly call him the most representative literary man of Victorian era. He is essentially a Victorian in the concept of love and his high regard for domestic virtues, right? So that was very important part, that high regard for domestic virtues, right? And then in his attitude towards women, he is also a true Victorian. The Victorian did not approve of women's struggle for rights of equality with men. That's a harsh reality of the society, that they did not approve of women's struggle for rights of equality with men. It was thought that they were created for looking after the household. Tennyson presents this faith in the princess. His well known poems are the In Memoriam, very famous, right? Ulysses, very famous. The Lady of Shalott, Break, Break, Break is also famous. The Eaters, very famous, right? What In Memoriam, Ulysses, Break, 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 the Lotus Eaters are very famous works of Tennyson. Now, Robert Browning. Robert Browning was prolific Victorian era poet, and he is naturally considered a Victorian poet, considering that he wrote during the time period of Victorian England. And yet Browning's work is simultaneously a revolt against some of the most well defined aspects of that time and reflection of characteristics. Robert Browning secured his place as a prominent poet with dramatic monologue. Credit goes to him. He was famous for dramatic monologue, the form he mastered, for which he became known and influential, right? Browning's first published work, Pauline, a fragment of a confession, was although formally a dramatic monologue, and embodied many of his own adolescent passions and anxieties. His noteworthy poems are My Last Duchess, Meeting at Night, The Ring, and the Book. This is famous, The Ring and the Book. And then Fra Lippo, Men and Women, and Lost Leader, The Lost Leader. These are the famous work, right? Now, conclusion. Due to progress of science and art, Victorian age is also known as modern Victorian age is also known as the modern period of progress and unrest. Progress but unrest. We can compare with today's time. That's a progress. Technically, we are progressing like anything, but at the same time, social evils, and then society is in trouble, right? And social evils are being raised day by day. So, in this period, writers were depicted about life on individual and its connection in to Victorian society. So it was an era of material development. Because of industrialization, materialistic development was there with ideal peace. This age was portrayed as a completely ideal life, right? So this age was portrayed as completely ideal life, and then this is an idealistic where the great idea like truth, justice, and brotherhood were emphasized by poets, essayists, and novelists of this age, right? So that is something, the characteristics of Victorian era. I think you like it. So all the best. Thank you. God bless you.